Yeah. No, I appreciate you putting this together and doing this. It's nice to have you on board with the team here, just because
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of expertise that we lean on that I think we wouldn't have otherwise. I'm
Yeah.
kind of excited for Rio to work with you, honestly, to try to start absorbing some of that knowledge. I think that'll be really good.
Oh, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Can you hear they're doing a tornado siren right now, to test, to like do a
So
test.
so I will be start. So I'm starting the webinar. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I trust you all are doing well. My name is Kabir, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's insightful webinar, proudly brought to you by Battle River Research Group. Today, we have a fascinating session lined up as we develop into the world of Humalite, a topic that holds great importance in our research and discussions. Before we dive into insightful discussions with our panelists, Daniel Kushner and Clay Williams, let's take care of some housekeeping. If you have any questions, feel free to ask during or end of the webinar. You can drop your questions in Q&A section or the comment section. I encourage all of the participants to ask questions and make the most of this opportunity to deepen your understanding of human life. Now, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our expert speakers, Daniel Kushner and Claire Williams. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
Hello. Thank you, Kabir, and thanks for everybody who is on the call. We're happy to be with you today. I'm going to load my presentation up here first, and Clay and I are kind of going to tag team things. I'll be speaking for the next 40 to 45 minutes, and then Clay will cover some material specific to our mine, the Westmet mine. Hold on one second.
Danny, do you want to do a bit of an introduction first, maybe, and we'll just kind of explain kind of some backgrounds and kind of where you're talking from down south there. So
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of was going to have that with the slides here, Clay. So
okay, good.
just knowing that, yeah, so I'll just jump to, oh, there, I'll jump to this slide. So I am a soil health consultant, a certified crop advisor in the US, in the States. And I teamed up with Westmet a little over a year ago. I've been working to support them in their product development and their agronomic research trials for their Humalite products. So I have about a decade's worth of experience working with humic acids and fulvic acids. I actually, it's funny that I'm now back working with a Canadian company, because I first started in humic and fulvic acids working in Ontario, Canada. So the other side of your country, but have had some experience in the Canadian prairies, and am just really happy to be supporting Westmet and their efforts. So this is just my personal mission statement here. I think Humulite and humic acids and fulvic acids definitely do a lot to heal the soil, and that's what we're all about here, is trying to get the most productivity out of our crops and our fields. I should add that, like, as an independent consultant, I'm not on the sales side of these products, so my presentation is pretty generic. It's not speaking about Humalite specifically. I will make some comments here and there, but that's why Clay's on the call here, to really bring in any specific information about the product itself. So with that, Clay, do you have anything to add? I guess just with our intros.
No, I think that's great. I'll do an introduction of myself when we get to my presentation. But yeah, Danny's a expert in the field, and so it's exciting to have her on here and talk to the kind of local Alberta market about what humics are and what they're capable of.
Awesome. So we'll jump right in. So I can't talk about humic acids and fulvic acids without first talking about carbon and the microbiology that's really driving our soil systems. And this is kind of, I shouldn't say kind of, it's still pretty new and cutting edge, the fact that we're talking about soil biology and carbon cycling as what is driving our soil health and our crop productivity. So I don't know if the participants on the call have seen this image of the bucket before, but it is the principle that there would be a limiting factor in your soil system, and these are all soil nutrients. And so you'll often see this bucket with all of the different soil nutrients, and they don't include carbon. And so I included carbon as what is the limiting factor in your field that might actually be reducing yields or holding you back from the most productivity. And so recognizing that carbon is the essential driver of all life processes on Earth. There's actually a lot of, this gets into a lot of biochemistry or like molecular structures, right, of how molecules form. And in order for something to be organic, not organic certified, just organic in terms of chemistry, we have to have a carbon molecule attached to it. So when I say that, it's the foundation of all physical, chemical, and biological processes on Earth, it's that, biochemistry of the fact that we want carbon attached to our nutrients to hold them in a more stable form and be used in various processes within the plant to build function and healthy productive crops. So this presentation, I'm only going to be giving you guys this little intro on soil, carbon, and microbiology. I could give a full presentation worth of going over all these different soil functions and plant functions of carbon. So this is just giving you a little bit of a picture, an idea of it. And I actually love this photo primarily because of the spider web. So all of these processes are interconnected, and it's trying to really drive some of the new science and what we're learning about soil biology home, that we can't just think about NPK. We can't just think about what crop we're going to choose, or our chemistry pet program or our pesticide management program. All these different things are interconnected, and carbon is really at the center of all of it. So what is soil organic matter? This is a picture here, and again, not going into too much depth with you guys on this, but just to help frame this up for fulvic acids and humic acids. We have stable organic matter making up about 42.5%, and we have our active organic matter making up about 42.5%. And I like to compare, I just add a little fun in my presentations. I love to compare it to different chocolate. Okay, so I'm a dark chocolate lover. The darker your soil color and texture, that crumbly nature of our soil that's looking kind of like chocolate cake crumbles, you might hear people compare it to, is the stable organic matter. We're trying to drive more of that in our system for it to be in a stable form where it's not going to be lost, versus the active form. That's what's turning over from our plant residues, debris in the field, last year's crops, or any cover crops that you guys might terminate. We're trying to turn that active portion of organic matter into the stable organic matter. And so you have fresh residue that's turning into active, that's then turning into stable, and the microbes are really the component that's doing the activity here. So in this slide, this is just another image of that kind of process. So we start with the fresh residue, and it's a matter of days, months to years until we turn into stable organic matter. But I make the little fire symbol around the microorganisms and their activity of working in the soil, because it really is like an engine. Like that's what's driving the carbon cycle in our fields. And there's a lot of talk these days about carbon capture or carbon sequestration. And what we're trying to do with our processes and our soil health is really actually drive the carbon cycling. The carbon isn't necessarily going to stay in one form. It's going to be moving throughout these different forms. So we want to be driving this cycling and capturing more into a stable form. But I like to use the term carbon cycling compared to carbon capture or sequestration, because we know it's constantly turning and moving. So with that kind of explanation, quick bird's eye view of soil organic matter and what we're driving here, this is a quote from the Humic Products Trade Association. So you're going to hear me mention that a couple times today, because I'm trying to drive home some information for you guys that will help you become more knowledgeable in these markets and how to have these conversations. And the Humic Products Trade Association, or HPTA for short, they are the ones that are they're like a trade association that is trying to help create some standardization in the humic acid market, so that all of us can have more standardized testing methods, more standardized comparison between different products, making these product comparisons and what's on the labels actually be apples to apples, rather than right now I'll describe a little later in the presentation how that's a challenge for us. But I view the HPTA kind of as a scientific and trade authority in this industry that's trying to help really move it forward. So this quote from them is that approximately 75% of the stable carbon components of soils under equilibrium conditions consist of humic substances found everywhere in soil and water environments as the byproducts of decayed biomatter. Okay, that's a mouthful, right? What does that mean? So this page is where it really begins to connect to our humic substances here on the far right. So this quote, all these fancy words, right? I want to drive it down into this kind of flow chart, showing that when we're talking about soil organic matter and trying to improve our soil organic matter in our fields, that breaks down into these three subgroups. So the living organisms, that's like your microbiology. It might even be some insects breaking down debris, earthworms. You have your dead plant material that's there, and that's that active portion that they're turning over into more stable organic matter. And then you have the humus, or what would be kind of that stable, more long-term portion. And so this really is that 75% quote, is that 75% of this stable humus portion is humic substances. That's fairly significant, right? When we think of what is actually driving soil health, what is actually creating stability and function in our soils. So the humic substances then, so you could say 25% is non-humic, 75% is humic, and then the humic is divided into three categories: human, humic acids, and fulvic acids, which I'm going to go over in depth here in a few minutes. I do just want to pause because I'm not able to monitor the chat. And Kabir, you're going to interrupt me if there are any questions as we go?
Yes, I will.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. For now, there is no question, but like somebody did write in the chat, love the chocolate analogy.
Yes, we can always talk about
Hello.
chocolate.
Can you hear
And
me?
yes.
So if there is if I see any question, I will let you know immediately.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just seeing a couple comments there, but I didn't read them. So thank you. And chocolate is always a helpful analogy, I think, just because it's fun and most people like chocolate. But it can help be a good descriptor. Okay, so carbon cycling, I was mentioning this earlier, and I'm just gonna kind of use this graphic to describe it and kind of pull in our microbes here a little more. So we have a plant that's photosynthesizing. They're taking in solar energy, CO2, and water to build carbohydrates. That's the definition of photosynthesis. And they're exuding some of those carbohydrates, as well as a lot of other compounds. I mean, they're sending enzymes, proteins, hormones, phytochemicals. They're sending lots of different things to the roots in the form of, you might hear root exudates or plant exudates. So they're using, some of it to build the plant and grow and, put into our crop for a yield, but they're sending a lot to the roots as well. And why would that be? That's estimated they send 33 to 50% of their energy to the roots. And when you really let that sit in, it's like, why would something, we would say, well, why is it going down there? Why would we just give away, 30% of our energy or 50% of our energy? Well, that is to feed these microbial communities that are in the soil, that are in these symbiotic relationships or reciprocal relationships where they're coming to the plant roots, feeding on some different root exudates, and also giving something to the plant in return. So they're able to bring soluble nutrients to the plant roots, and there's an exchange happening there. And then those soil microorganisms release more CO2, which if this is, again, another view of a cycle, if this is really cycling and we have robust photosynthesis and robust microbiology, that respiration from the microbes breathing out CO2 will go right back up into the plant. From the stomata, there's openings on the plants called stomata, and they take in the CO2. And so that drives even more photosynthesis. So this is really, another view of the engine and a cycle that we want to be feeding here with our farm management. And this is the beauty of that microbiology. Again, I won't go into this in depth. You can hear whole presentations on the soil food web. I actually learned about the soil food web from Dr. Erlang Ingham when I was at the Rodale Institute about a decade ago. So this is kind of the basis of her work, and a lot of other scientists have built off of it since then. But you have lots of different species, and just want to point out that they have different levels going this way. So the species kind of fall in these different trophic levels. And the more diversity that we have this way, we increase function. So just recognize that these different species within these different levels all bring a certain layer of function, and the more diversity of species, the more function, or you could say it's going to result in better soil health or improved impacts in our crops in our fields. So these microbes, they have basic needs, just like people do, just like humans. And wow, I'm realizing this is my first time maybe sharing the acronym in Canada. So you guys can be the inaugural audience here. But I have this little acronym, AWTF, to help you remember these 4 needs of microbes. And so our Canadian friends, I won't cuss on the webinar because I realize that this is being recorded and shared. But so, the A, you could have that kind of be like or just like kind of like an expression, like, or A, and then WTF, right? Like what the, and then you guys can fill in the word, right? So I kind of use this as a joke with farmers, because if I'm walking through a field or a farmer is describing a challenge or an issue that they're having, it kind of really all falls back to this. Some farmers just last year, oh, I'm not seeing as much productivity for my nitrogen, or it's just, the drought's really hurting me, or whatever it might be. And these are farmers I'm working with throughout the US. So I didn't get to work with as many Canadian growers this past year, but in any circumstance of whenever you're walking your fields or with your crops, and you're recognizing something that just doesn't look right, or something struggling, come back to that acronym. You can walk through your field and say, what the, is it air? Is air the limiting factor? Because these microbes need to breathe. There needs to be an exchange between that oxygen and CO2 gas in the soil. And so if there's compaction in any way that's limiting your field, it could be limiting the first thing, which is air, right? And just like you guys have seen the chart, I didn't include it in here, but 25% of soils are air, 25% are water, approximately 45% mineral, and the rest, the 5% is the organic matter and the microbes. And so if we don't have these two things, 50% of the soil, right, 25% or 25% water, if we don't have that basis for our soil, then, I mean, everything else is kind of going to struggle a little bit, right? So the first one is air. The microbes need to breathe just like we do. The second one being water. In the situation of drought, okay, if you don't have water, well, the microbes need water just like we do. And if they don't have enough water, they're also going to slow down and not function. You won't be getting the nutrient cycling from them. So is water flowing through your fields? Do you have enough water? I make the T temperature. Some people have this as shelter as a need. So it's the soil aggregate structure. It's just what is the texture of the soil? What's the structure, the texture? This photo here is, really nice aggregate structure and just like really loose, loamy soil. We recognize that all of us don't have that, right? You guys might have more sand, you might have more clay. What's your base soil that you're starting to work with? And then the F being food. So these microbes need different food sources, and I kind of break it down and simplify it quite a bit as a means of teaching farmers. But these are different foods that we can assist these microbes with. And so I'm going to go through this food slide here, which if there are any soil microbiologists on this call or somebody who's going to listen to this later, have some grace with this. This is very pared down. I guess they're simplified down. I recognize that it's a lot more complicated if we really get into like the biochemistry and soil health science of what's actually happening here. But I think this is really a great explanation that I learned from my mentors over the years that helps describe to farmers two main points that I want to make here in this. So we have these species of microbes, which, if you guys remember, these are the main species from this slide. So we have bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. As we go from left to right here, and we get more complicated and get, protozoa, nematodes are further down the line, they have a higher carbon ratio in their bodies, okay? So everything on planet Earth has a C to N ratio, carbon to nitrogen ratio. And in the case of these microbial species, they're feeding on the lower levels of the microbes in order to get their carbon and nitrogen fix, okay? So as an example, we'll walk through this. So the higher species feed on the lower species. So let's say a protozoa, which needs 30 carbon and 1 nitrogen to reproduce, it's going to eat some bacteria. So it's going to need to feed on 6 bacteria to get its 30 carbon, right? But then that means if it's eating 6 bacteria, it's going to get 6 nitrogen, right? Well, it only needs 1 nitrogen. So where are those extra nitrogen going to go? The 5 that it doesn't need. And they will be released back to the soil in a more stable form, NH4, ammonium, which can then be utilized either to the plant or to other microbes in the soil. Okay, so that's kind of like the cycling of nutrients. That's where this tiny soluble bags of fertilizer comes from. So that's point one, is that by microbes feeding on each other and actually cycling that carbon, they're releasing other nutrients to the soil in more available forms. And nitrogen's is just one example. They'll do this with phosphorus, they'll do this with potassium. So that's point one. Point two is that if we recognize that in these numbers, the carbon is always greater than the nitrogen, okay? So we only need 1 nitrogen, but we need a lot of carbon. And yes, there's lots of carbon in our soil profiles in terms of our organic matter and what's just, native to your guys' farm fields. But when we're adding nitrogen, if we're only adding nitrogen without any carbon, where is that carbon going to come from? It has to come from somewhere. So you guys put out a nitrogen application and, say we're putting on 100 pounds of nitrogen and we want to feed that, that crop that you're growing. But there's going to need to be some carbon there because the microbes will wake up. They'll say, oh, great, here's some nitrogen. We're going to reproduce. Oh, we'll just pull some carbon from somewhere, right? They're going to pull it from the existing soil organic matter, what's already cycling in the soil, either as active or stable organic matter. And they'll use that to reproduce, but that means that we're drawing the carbon from somewhere, right? So in low CEC soils or low carbon soils, sandy soils, in situations where there might be a lot of tillage and we're removing some of that organic matter, the more stable carbon when we're releasing that by tillage. And even in our crops, I know you guys might not grow as much corn up your way. I should change this to some of your crops that you grow, but there's a little bit of carbon removal in all of our crops as well, right? So carbon is constantly moving through the system, but when we put on these large nitrogen applications, we need to recognize that the microbes, at least, they're going to be pulling carbon from somewhere as well as when we might be losing carbon to other scenarios. So that kind of wraps up kind of the intro, laying the stage, and I'm now going to jump into humic acids and fulvic acids, specifically knowing that we have this background on how the carbon and the microbiology are driving the system. So humates are ancient carbon, okay? They are plant material that has been decomposed and kind of compressed underneath the earth for millions of years. I mean, these are some of the estimates of various mines. And Clay will talk really specifically about the Humalite mine, but this is just a photo of a mine where they're digging out these raw earth deposits. These are some of the different examples of different of the different materials or deposits. Humalite is the one specific to what this webinar is on today. And this is just another photo of it, so we have plants that are kind of from like the dinosaur period. That's where this photo comes from. And they've been compressed, broken down, under soil and rock for millions of years. We're able to mine those out, put them into certain types of products, and then we apply them back on our crops to kind of add that carbon back to the system. As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 types of humic substances: humin, humic acid, and fulvic acid. And this chart is one that's used a lot. You guys can look it up if you want. Stevenson, 1982. And it gives kind of the spectrum here that these substances fall on. So when when Clay, right at the mine, is digging out his raw material, he's going to be getting a composition of some portion of all of this in that final product. Okay, so humin, you don't hear a lot about. It's normally like not on labels or bags, or people don't make a lot of claims about it because it's the most alkaline and insoluble portion of, I'm sorry, I should have taken out this leonardite, of like any humic substance or material. So it's just the insoluble portion of the rock, okay? And so you don't hear a lot about that. The humic acid and the fulvic acid are really what have the powerful action or properties that we want in our soil health. And so the humic acid is soluble with like an alkaline pH, and it really has a lot of complexing and chelating sites, which I'll get to here in a minute. But it can hold a lot of material, as well as the fulvic acid also has a lot of complexing and chelating sites, but it is highly soluble in both in a more of an acidic situation. So this is where you have this range here. So fulvic would be like more acidic, humic acid more alkaline, and then humin kind of insoluble. And I'm going to cover kind of the main takeaways that I want you guys to know from these bottom chart levels here in a minute. So these are complex carbon molecules. humic acid or fulvic acid. They're actually like lengths of carbon chains. So the definition of how they get classified, of whether it's a humic acid or a fulvic acid, is really on that carbon chain length. So the fulvic acids have a little shorter chain. The humic acids are a longer, more complex carbon chain. And you'll see, you know, these are primarily made of just these four molecules: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. My three takeaways, so simplifying this slide for you to kind of like the three things that I want farmers to learn and kind of remember about humic substances are these three that I'm going to cover. So as I just described, the molecular chain length increases from fulvic acid being the shortest, humic being, you know, the next longest, then human or even longer, but we don't really pay as much attention to those. Solubility, the fulvic acid is the most soluble. So in my experience, I've never really seen a situation where fulvic acid like won't blend in a tank mix or won't become soluble. Whereas humic acid, mostly because of some of the pH issues and some of the insoluble fraction, is a little less soluble, so kind of in the middle. And human is highly insoluble material. And then going the opposite way, the CEC actually increases the opposite way. So fulvic acid has the highest CEC of these substances. Some people estimate like 1,000 plus CEC. Just think about that, right? You guys know the CECs of your soil. You know, are you 5? Are you 10? Are you 20? You know, what's kind of your average CECs of your soil, right? These are, you know, 1,000 CEC, and humic acid can kind of range in the hundreds, anywhere from, you know, a couple hundred to 600 or 800 CEC. So these are definitely powerful holding materials that can help hold our nutrients in more stable forms. And these are just examples of crop inputs. So you guys can get these in liquid form. You can get them in raw, you know, powders or granular form, or, you know, manufactured into like pellets. So there's lots of different, you know, ranges of materials that these come in. And Clay's going to talk specific to Humalite in his slides. Okay, so we know where they came from. What do they do? Humic substances are recognized by most soil scientists and agronomists as the most important component of a healthy, fertile soil. And when I'm in my in-person presentations chatting about this is when I would give the audience interaction, and you guys would have to say why, right? And so we won't do that on the call, but it's because of that, you know, people say, oh, well, it's the carbon, it's the soil organic matter. It's that 75% of the humic substances make up, you know, the stable portion of the soil organic matter, or you know, the humus. So primary uses, these are actually certain label claims that have been identified by that HPTA organization. Again, kind of claim them as an authority in the space. They've done a lot to compile a lot of the research and data here. So they improve root mass and growth. There's an enhanced nutrient availability and uptake, and higher crop yield and quality. Those are kind of the three main things. And I've just broken that out into some, you know, you could just say more words, but they increase plant quality and production. They help with that stronger root system, in all different factors here: root length, density, radius. When we have stronger root systems below ground, we'll oftentimes have a stronger, more resilient plant above ground. They increase photosynthesis, which again is that cycle of energy, right, that I had described. So more energy in the system, or cycling of carbon and nutrients when we have increased photosynthesis. They increase the plant's resistance to stress in that regard as well, by helping the natural immune system function of the plant. Improve nitrogen assimilation and uptake, and they help, you know, by their chelation, by their holding capacity. they help, one second, Kabir, they help to move sugars and other minerals and compounds throughout the plant. Yes, Kabir.
There is a question for you.
Okay.
Can the humic or fulvic acid change the pH of soils?
Yes, and I'm going to comment on that when I talk about plant buffering of more like a root zone. So they, it would only be in small doses where we're applying them, but I will get to that in a slide here. Thank you. So because I didn't want to burden you guys with a whole bunch of graphs and fancy scientific data, if you are a science geek or buff, or like I'm a soil health geek, so I like embrace that term, don't worry. But you can go to the HPTA website, and this is just a sampling of their reference materials, but they, any product claim, they then have backup research to that. And this is just a sampling, but this link, if you look it up, will actually pull up, I didn't count, but it's probably 100 or around 100 or more research studies that have been peer-reviewed research on humic substances. So just, that can be your reference link. These have been well-verified, well-researched materials. And I think they've gotten, maybe a bad rap in the past because there wasn't the scientific rigor behind them, but we now have that, and we're now, increasing the amount of data behind how they actually work. So some notes on fulvic acid specifically. I am a lover of fulvic acid, I must confess, but it's just for us to understand, some main differences or ways when we would use humic acid and fulvic acid. So just remember, it is that smallest molecule. So it moves really easily across cell membranes, and the highest solubility, as I'd mentioned, it helps it to blend really well with whatever materials it's blended with. It also has the strongest CEC. So that, so think smallest molecule, but strongest CEC, that's that surface area dynamic where it has actually more exchange sites and can hold on to more of our nutrients to help get them into our plant roots or actual green growing material. And that will, protect whatever it is put with from being lost, both nutrients and or pesticides included. So from actually one of my former employers, we kind of called it a tank mix partner. So that's another term. And to drive home another point that I sometimes think gets lost on people is that all humic acid contains some portion of fulvic acid. So in these mining operations, and how I said, if they go in, they take a bucket full of mining out whatever the deposit is, it's going to have a blend of the humic and the fulvic. And what they have to do is take the fulvic off of the humic in various extraction processes in order to separate those two. So like this Humalite that Clay will be talking about has actually all three components in it. And so it does have a certain percentage of fulvic acid in it. And just wanting you to know that whenever you're getting a humic acid, you're also getting a little bit of fulvic acid as well. Okay, what you've all been waiting for, and per the question about buffering pH, how do we use this? So I would love it if we were all in a room together and I could, know more of your guys's situations of what your soils are and what your crops are and what your management is and what your goals are. This really is a conversation when I talk about humic and fulvic acid of like, what's your long-term end game? Are we going for, soil health and really trying to improve organic matter maybe over the long term? Or are we looking for in-season fixes? Are we looking to rescue a crop? Are we dealing with drought scenarios, right? So challenge soil types. Like I will say that I'm gonna kind of share several different scenarios where we can include humic acids, but it's all gonna kind of come back to this point of like, what's your goal, right? So think, so number one area to use them is as with our nitrogen. So per my slide before about whenever we put out nitrogen, that's going to need a little bit of carbon to work with it. I want to think of humic acids and fulvic acids as companion products with nitrogen. So if you didn't even think about anything else in your system, I'm sure every farmer is applying nitrogen. So I think every farmer should be applying humic acid. That's my, I could call that a biased opinion, but as a soil health educator and practitioner, I would say that that's actually, a very great place to start in terms of where we should pair these. And I just made some fun analogies. What's your guys' favorite pairing? Peanut butter and jelly or beer and pretzels, right? Like for me, it's chocolate and peanut butter. So, yeah, we got to think of these things as working together in a system. This is a little bit of a summary chart. I won't read everything on the page here for you because I've kind of already covered most of this, but we've talked about the acidity and the different pH of these different products. Solubility, so that would be like in a liquid form. So there's dry and liquid, right? And Humalite products that Clay will talk about are the dry products. So this comment on solubility is really for liquid products. I had spoken last week at some conferences, and there was a farmer who came up to me and said that he has blended liquid humic acid with no problems with glyphosate. So I was really happy to hear that, but just recognize this is all like product specific, and that anything with glyphosate or pesticides, when we're blending humic acid with those, is more so comes back to a pH issue. So just to make sure that oftentimes they'll want more of an acidic solution for the pesticides, but if you have a product that does work and it's humic acid based, it very well could blend with those. I talked about the molecular length, that the fulvic acid is shorter, yet has a higher CEC. And the point that I would want to make here on the humic acid is because it's a longer chain and a more complex carbon molecule, it really feeds our soil fungi. So if you guys have, if you're getting interested with the soil health tests of like the microbiology tests and these various components of like what microbes do I actually have in my soil, and you're short on fungi and you want to try to increase your fungal numbers and feed mycorrhizal fungi, or there's trichoderma. There's a lot of good soil fungi that can actually help protect the plant. You'd want to lean more toward your humic acid. Sorry. Application, again, that's going to be product specific, but really I like humic acid when we're going in furrow or 2x2 or anything that's hitting the soil, primarily just because it's kind of that more complex carbon chain will really feed that soil microbiology. And then these are just some ideas of use rates. Again, this was for liquids, so the dry rates are different. I should have added those on here, but again, that's all product specific. Okay, so first scenario, or I guess second scenario behind nitrogen is that really to increase CEC on any, low CEC or sandy soils. So just showing here, or for our memory, and so that sinks in with you guys, right? If our soils are running pHs somewhere like this, and humus even has a pH of 150 to 250, humic acid starts out in those low, low hundreds and only goes up from there. So it really will help add carrying capacity and holding capacity to a low CEC or sandy soil. With that, nitrogen that I mentioned before, this is just reminding us of I like to call this microbe math. So remembering our carbon and nitrogen ratios, and anytime we put out a nitrogen to add a carbon source to it. This is a little trick that, shouldn't say a trick, it's more a strategy. I don't know how much the Haney test has become popular in Canada, but that's a new, soil health test that specifically can focus in on your nitrogen use efficiency, and if you can cut back on your nitrogen. And I like to work with, the first place we should start is make sure we're not over applying nitrogen in the first place, right? Before we even cut back. So do you guys know your nitrogen use efficiency and how much nitrogen we need to produce, X amount of crop, right? And so once we know that number and we make sure that we're not over applying, can we begin to reduce nitrogen when we add a carbon source? So the Haney test will often come back and tell you, okay, you can reduce, and I've seen a lot of Haney tests that they kind of average between that like 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen reduction. So do you take the cost of what, if you reduce your nitrogen a little bit, do you take that cost and replace it with the carbon source? So say it's like, okay, you're gonna get some Humalite, or you're gonna trial some Humalite, and whatever that cost of reducing your nitrogen, if you replaced it with the cost of the Humalite, you're actually not increasing your cost per acre, right? It'd be the same net cost. So it's just a little bit of a strategy if you're trying not to spend more money per acre on your crops. Within nitrogen use efficiency, there's also the action of humic acid specifically on the urease molecule, which we know would utilize urea and can have it be lost from the system potentially, as well as, I got some rap for this too. Like, urease isn't all bad if we're trying to make it available and it's immediately getting available into the plant root, but oftentimes urease is known as like totally losing nitrogen from the system, and that's why we use urease inhibitors, right? But in the case of if you weren't using a nitrogen inhibitor and you were using some humic acid, it kind of functions. I can't, we can't classify it as a nitrogen inhibitor, okay? So we have to be very careful there, but that it can reduce loss because it's going to tie up and help sequester certain metals like nickel. So this is the urease molecule, and if the nickel is inaccessible or not usable because it's being held by the humic acid, then the urease actually wouldn't be able to work on the urea and have it be lost from the system. In regard to phosphorus, this is one that I really like to just raise for awareness. I'm a proponent of helping farmers along in their management system. Okay, so I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm not telling people to cut back on nitrogen or phosphorus without really working on soil health and making it a phased in approach to your management system to make sure that you're not going to lose on yield. But with phosphorus, here we have a picture of mycorrhizal fungi. And humic acids, as I mentioned before, really feed that soil fungi, like the mycorrhizal fungi. So when we are feeding soluble phosphorus into the system, so if we're doing MAP or DAP or 1030-4-0 or a form of really highly soluble phosphorus, and we flood the system with that, the mycorrhizal fungi will become more, it's not like they'll become lazy. They're not going to be active because there's already phosphorus flooding the system. So if you were to want to access and kind of kickstart those mycorrhizal fungi to actually mine the phosphorus for you and maybe not spend as much of that input money cost on soluble phosphorus, we can feed the mycorrhizal fungi with humic acids. They'll kind of go to work for you if you have legacy phosphorus in your soils and make that more plant available. So again, just to drive that point home, it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because we're kicking ourselves if we're putting a lot of soluble phosphorus in the system and not allowing the mycorrhizal fungi to go to work for us, if there's already enough phosphorus in our soils for them to do so. All right, so this is chelation of nutrients and pesticides. This would be really for like a foliar situation. Just want you to raise your awareness to this, even though Humalite can be made into liquid products, but Westmet doesn't currently sell the liquid products themselves. So hold on one second. So when you include the fulvic acid, because of that small molecular size and the long or the smallest size that penetrates through any foliar tissue, as well as the highest CEC, it can hold really well onto our herbicides and fungicides and help increase their efficacy, getting them into the plant. There also is a little bit of a stress reduction or stress mitigation with fulvic acid. So you'll, if you went out and sprayed a herbicide and included the fulvic acid in the tank, you'll see a quicker bounce back, or not as much, stress or burn from the herbicide when there's fulvic acid in there. Fulvic acid in cloudy weather has also been called liquid sunshine, and that's per gram sate of Nutritech Solutions out of Australia. This when I keep making my claw with my fist or describing chelation and complexion, this is kind of that symbol just of showing how these carbon, which is really, like a C, right? It helps hold on to certain nutrients and deliver them either into the plant or the roots or other microbes, or actually keep them from getting tied up with other compounds, in this case, zinc to phosphorus. All right, so per that question of buffering of high pH, alkalinity, high salt soils. So when we can apply the humic acid as close to the seed as possible, so at planting, I've even seen, seed coatings, or like in with the planter box. If it's not in like a granular form, like if it was more like a dust, as close to the seed as possible, it can help kind of buffer that seed trench. So the earlier the application on the compromised soils, the better. So whether it's with the seed, broadcast pre-plant, or in furrow. Fulvic acid, because of its lower pH, will affect that root zone and mitigating the pH just right there in the root zone. The humic acids also will help as well. It's just the fulvic acid has the lower pH. So I would say anything in the root zone on a high pH alkaline soil is really going to help. A lot of farmers don't realize that, so like you have a high pH soil and your roots are actually exudating pretty, shouldn't say pretty, but they're acidic compounds. So the root exudates in themselves are already acidic. They're trying to drive down the pH of that immediate root zone environment. So the humic acids or fulvic acids are just kind of helping accelerate that process. And then humic and fulvic acid can also buffer salts or high salt soils. Other considerations, this is just, my personal thoughts when I'm working as an agronomist or a consultant. I always encourage people, do trials, make sure it works for you and your system. You also need to make sure, other than, say an ROI, that that the handability, the usability, right? Making sure it's not extra steps or extra work, that these products really work for you. And I think Clay will talk a little bit about that with the Humalite specifically, and how guys have used it in the past. I guess I'm trying to drive home the point there, is that there's been a lot of technology and a lot has come along in the past, maybe decade, that these products they shouldn't add extra work in your system. They're add-ons and they're complements, but they shouldn't really cause you a lot of strife, because there's been that much improvement in the manufacturing processes of them. You can also see to test if they're working with, if you guys know Brix, that's testing plant sugars with a refractometer within 24 to 48 hours, or that Haney test that I had previously mentioned. There were some trials that I saw where even 5 days after application, it changed the Haney test numbers. So there's ways that you can prove, like, hey, what am I actually getting out of these substances? You can see the improved either sugar content or nutrient uptake from some of these tests. And I'll just conclude here with a few comments that I really want you guys to be empowered in the conversation. I mean, you have Clay here as the expert that you can ask these questions to, that I'm about to share with you. But what it comes down to in the humic acid market, I think, is understanding the different testing methodologies and these different questions that I'm going to just briefly chat through here. So what mine location did it come from? That's something that from what I've seen, I always will recommend a North American source of a mine. Just a lot of the stuff overseas I've seen with higher heavy metal content, and advise farmers to stay clear of that. What percentage of humic acid and fulvic acid does it contain? So again, remembering that all humic acid has a little bit of fulvic acid in it. The manufacturer should be able to tell you those numbers. They should be able to share, documents with you, or what testing methodology that they use, so that you're confident you know what you're getting. And of course, trial data, right? Have they done some of their own homework on their products? And this is kind of this is my last slide, but it's actually maybe one of the most complicated, without going into too much depth. I didn't put too many words on the slide here, but it really does come back to you guys understanding what testing methodology that product used to get whatever number they're using on their package or their label. Okay, so the HPTA that I mentioned earlier, they are really trying to advocate for a standardized testing method. They're calling it the ISO approved method, ISO, the international standard. And we haven't had this. This is something fairly recent. I mean, it's trying to get more and more out into the mainstream, and the HPTA is trying to, they were established in 2010, but they're trying to gain, more trade partners and more industry partners. But it's like right now we don't have a setup in the humic acid space where we can compare apples to apples. So one bag or jug, you have to ask a lot of questions of that company and manufacturer before you can compare it to this bag or jug, because you need to know what testing method they used in order to get the numbers that are on their package. And so these are 3 labs that use the ISO method for the HPTA approved method, or the HPTA approved method, in other words. And that some of the other testing methods you might see out there, there's the CDFA, which is California, which I don't think you guys would run into a lot of that in Canada. There's the colorimetric test. There's the VMB method. There's even one for a barium chloride method. Like, there's a lot of different methods. I just mentioned 3 to 4 of them there, where if it's not the ISO method, or we're not comparing ISO method to ISO method, right, then we're really not comparing apples to apples. So I like to work with, and I guess stand behind companies that are using the HPTA method. And I know that Westmet Ag and Humalite are doing that. And so just wanting to try to share that information, again, to empower the farmers so that you guys can be empowered in the conversation. And before I hand it over to Clay here, I guess if you guys have any questions now, I can answer them, or you can always follow up and send me an email if you have anything.
Yeah, there is 2 questions actually.
Okay.
So one is from Jill. When you add 0.5 gallon humic acid, how much carbon would you be adding to the system? Is there something we should be asking? I guess it's in relation to how much carbon microbes would pull up from carbon already there if you didn't feed with humic acid.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is specific to the manufacturer. So in that case, knowing that it sounds like, if that's like a liquid carbon, I always put kind of, drill the manufacturer, drill the company that you're buying from. So I can't answer that in general for all products or all companies. There are a few humic acids out there, and fulvic acids that I know are actually trying to drive into that ratio of like this much carbon, you get this much carbon from this much product, or this much carbon helps hold this much nitrogen. But honestly, those are few and far between companies, and I try to drill the companies when I'm in any of those conversations. So I would just encourage you as a farmer or producer to have that conversation with whoever you're buying from.
So there is another question. We are in Alberta, have a very high Humalite coal mine that was previously used for thermal coal. Who should we talk to see if this mine is a candidate for Humalite?
I'll talk all about that in my presentation here, and it's not only a candidate, it's the industry leader.
Yeah,
Okay,
so that's Clay's going to jump into Humalite here. Yeah.
so there is one more question. What's is in general the pH of humic and fulvic acid?
Okay, yeah, so humic, anywhere from like 7 to 9. Again, this is kind of depending on the manufacturer, depending if we're talking liquid or dry. I can kind of use that generality. We can just say that's alkaline, so above 7. And the humic, or sorry, the fulvic, less than acidic. So I kind of see those between like 3 and 5%. But again, manufacturer specific, you should be able to get that pH number from the manufacturer.
So there is another question. What increase in Brix could you see after applying fulvic in the crop?
Well, it depends. It depends what your bricks started at. So I've seen just a couple percentage points if they know how to read the refractometer. Even if you see like a slight bump, again, these are all, we can't make claims of like, okay, is it going to be 2 points or 3 points in every scenario because there's so many different factors that go into that. But just, look at take a test with your refractometer beforehand. Wait, you can even do it at 24 hours and 48 hours afterward, but like, right, see how it's increasing. And that would only be, you'll be able to see that on a liquid application. Okay. So if you're doing a dry application, pre-plant or at planting or with your nitrogen pass, you're going to have to wait for longer for that dry, for the dry humic acid. It lasts longer in the soil and it is broken down and used up within that year, but that's not going to be an immediate effect. That comment about the bricks was on a liquid application, foliar application.
Perfect. I think
All
that's
right.
all for all the
So
questions.
I
I don't see
will
any other.
stop sharing and then Clay can take over.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to thank Danny to start with for coming and doing this presentation. It's really quite a privilege for all of us here in Alberta to have such an expert giving the science behind all this. It's a very complex subject, so to have somebody of her caliber giving that explanation is helpful to everyone. I'm going to do it a little bit more from a practical standpoint. I'll start by giving a bit of an introduction of who I am. I'm Clay Williams. I'm the WestMed Ag manager and the manager of the Sheerness mine, which is a perfect lead into the question about the Alberta mine that was a thermal coal mine that is now a humic mine, and that's who we are and that's what we are. We used to mine thermal coal at this site for quite a few years, supporting the generating station that was across the road, and obviously supporting the community. Politically, thermal coal was no longer viable, and so they converted over to natural gas, and we shifted and started a new entity called WestMed Ag, and what that's all focused around is the Humalite. So when we were running thermal coal, we would run into this product all the time that would be in our way. It's a different seam, it's a different product, but it has no heat value to it. It doesn't burn. And so as we kind of it was sold for a lot of years to other processors that made it into liquids and pearls and stuff like that. So a lot of the humic products that you do get up here in Canada originated from this mine and still continue to originate from this mine, but we've taken on a different approach to it and are taking this on from an Alberta approach to support the local markets as well as kind of grow into the rest of the world from what we have here. And what's exciting about this reserve is it's unique to Alberta. Humalite is a term coined for a humic substance derived in Alberta. And what's really exciting about it, especially this reserve, is it's the highest quality humic resource in the world with low heavy metals and extremely high humic acid contents. It's also probably the largest scaled mine out there. So we obviously had the capability going from thermal coal to this to have huge, volume capacities. But not only that, the reserve is significant. So we're probably an order of magnitude larger than any of the other North American mines. So it's exciting to have this here in our back pocket and to be the quality that it is. So for reference, Danny was talking about the different testing methods, and so she's talking about the ISO 19822 humic acid testing, and so that's kind of the standardized test. And so we're in that 60 to 70% range pretty consistently, which is higher than almost all of them, all other sources. But at the same time, ours is all very, very low in heavy metals. And so it's got to do with how it was formed back in the millions of years ago when this was formed and oxidized and gone through the humidification process. This was done in fresh water rather than salt water. So there is a lot of contaminants in saltwater formations, whereas this is free of all that. But back to the humic acid testing. So one thing to note is when you're looking at other humic products and kind of comparing apples to apples, a lot will try to use other testing methods because it'll make it look better, higher numbers. And so common one is the colorimetric test. And so if you do this same product in a colorimetric test, you'll get like 95 to 98%, but it's not truly telling you what you need to know, which is the humic and fulvic contents. And so ours is also, you'll see in that test, very high organic matter, which is a combination of all of these pieces, the human, the humic, the fulvic. And so we have pretty high humic contents. We have some fulvic, kind of like Danny said, you'll always see that with it. But the remainder is the human portion. And when used in a raw aspect, you actually get that with it. Whereas when it's extracted and you're using these liquids and pearls, you're only getting the humic acid portion or only the fulvic acid portion. So in some instances, that's what you're after, but there is opportunities to do it otherwise. And so because of the content of what this Humalite is, we're registered and organic certified. So we're registered through ProCert and OMRI as an organic crop input. So I guess, I'm also a local farmer and rancher here as well. And so I saw the opportunities to use this product, especially in Alberta. And I'll kind of touch on some of the really exciting parts of what it can do, especially in the dry area of special areas that we're in here and the high saline, solonetzic type soils that it's got pretty big opportunities in. But we've done quite a bit of testing both on site and with universities, and I'll kind of go deeper into each of these categories. What Humalite is capable of is it increases root growth. It is a feed housing unit for microbial activity. So it increases that part. It improves fertilizer use efficiency. So we've done quite a bit of testing with different fertility packages and seeing how you can carry your fertilizer further, improve soil structure. I'll kind of touch on that in the SAR reduction, and kind of you'll see some pictures of how it changes pretty much what the dirt looks like, which is pretty significant. The biggest one I wanted to get to on this list was water retention. It is got quite the characteristic to it that it'll suck up moisture from anywhere. Handling this stuff is interesting because we try to keep it as dry as possible, makes it more flowable, easier to handle. But honestly, it'll suck moisture from the atmosphere. It'll take moisture from everything. So it is one of the struggles of handling it, but what makes it highly effective in the soil is because that's where you want to keep your moisture. It's also a pH reducer. That was one of the questions on, how does it reduce your pH? How does the product itself affect pH? So, when you're have ideal growing conditions, you're looking at, 6.5 pH type soils. And in this part of the province, anyway, it's a lot of high pH soils. You have 7.5 to 8.5 soils. And so that's where Humalite shines. It's 3.5 to 4.5 pH. So you do get some quick results in those type of soils. So we've used the U of A for a few years now to do some studies from a greenhouse stance. I have this cited at the end of the presentation, but if anybody wants the paper that this came from, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I can get it to you. But they did different rates of Humalite on wheat and used root scanners to scan the roots and see how much difference the Humalite made. And you can just visually see how much more root growth you got with different humic rates. This is obviously in a controlled environment, being a greenhouse study, but it definitely paints the pictures of what it's doing under the ground. So to put this into practicality, I guess. So we do a lot of these studies with the Humalite on a bunch of the mine reclamation land and see how it affects some of these poor quality soils. You know, we were starting with some poor quality soils before it was mined, and then after in this picture, that's been mined for thermal coal, leveled, soiled, and then put back. And so that's pretty old stand. That's probably been reclaimed 20 years plus. But after it's been in hay type vegetation, it kind of sat dormant for quite a few years. And you'll see in the top part of that picture above the line there, that's kind of the control, didn't get anything on it. And you'll see lots of holes in the alfalfa, didn't really want to grow, kind of died out over time. But the one on the bottom is actually, we spread Humalite on it. And in the next year, a lot of that alfalfa got stimulated and came back. And I think it's got a lot to do with kind of the legumes and how that soil health, that soil microbial activity really stimulates these legumes. And so that's just something we saw on site. There's nothing too concrete on it, but it's just an interesting picture to show what it's capable of. Kind of leads into the next one. This is from, go ahead.
I have some questions for you.
Yep.
Yeah. So first question is, yup, Clay, that is the mine I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and so yeah, we were thermal. We're 100% focused on both just reclamation activities of the legacy coal, and so that's going to be fully extinguished here in a couple years and totally taken care of. But everything going forward here is 100% focused on humics.
Next question is for both of you guys. Danny or Clay, how do you feel about carbon addition in the form of biochar, which is a graphene carbon form?
I'll touch on that a little bit, and Danny can probably touch on it more from the science side. But previous to being Westmet and being a different company, we were previously owned by Westmoreland, and we had a char plant out in Estevan, and that was one of the things that was we were looking at is blending humics with char, but it is a little different beast. It's a lot higher rates. It is for a different purpose almost a little bit. It's the same category, but used differently. I think they both are great for, you know, some of that moisture retention stuff and housing for soil microbial activity stuff. But Danny might be able to touch on the science side of it more, but it's not as economical to a broad acre farm.
And the last question is, as Humalite holds moisture so well, how well does it release it and make it available to plants and crops?
I guess that's more research we're doing, but just from a anecdotal part of that, you see like land that's been treated with Humalite for 2 or 3 years, and you can just feel the moisture in the soil over the control quite significantly. I think as far as how that's released back to the plant, that's more on the science side, and studies are happening, but I don't think I can give you an answer on that. Do you want to expand on any of those, Danny?
Well, I think to the previous question, I'm not familiar with graphene carbon specifically, so I think Clay answered it really well with his description and the fact that I mean biochars, yeah, like these are all different carbon forms. We didn't go into biochar specifically because this is a different carbon than like what carbon would be like in biochar. So yeah, different things. They could both be different soil amendments for different purposes is I think the main point to drive home there. And then the second question was like the water holding capacity, and that so that'll the humic acid is changing the soil structure or trying to create more soil aggregates, more like holding sites. So the water is kind of held in the soil organic matter. And in terms of how it's released, I mean, that's just different. It means cycling, it's held in the water, so it's available when the roots hit it, or, you know, available to microbes wherever it is. But to Clay's point, just the soil can feel different or feel more moist. That's kind of the function of the soil aggregate structure holding the water. So that's where the water holding capacity comes in.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll jump back into the kind of the science side before I get a little bit more into into the product side of stuff and where we're at. But the other thing I wanted to touch on, just from some of these studies that we've gotten back recently, is the nitrogen use efficiency, which Danny pretty much touched on and talked about. But long story short, from a greenhouse study, here's the science of it, here's the proof of it, here's some statistical data. It does improve your nitrogen use efficiency, and we can provide all the studies that we've gotten done if anybody's looking for that type of thing. So what I'm really excited to talk about is the SAR improvements that we've done with some studies on site here. And so we've been taking subsoil material that fails on SAR. And so SAR is your sodium absorption ratio. So ultimately salinity, how bad the salinity is affecting the soil. And so in that top left picture, you can see some subsoil that failed real bad. It's hard as a rock. It's high in salts. You can see the white tinge to it. And from cups from the left to the right, you can see that we increased just by a small percentage how much humics we've added to it. And you can see the physical difference of what it's done to the soil. But ultimately, that graph on the right is some lab testing on each of those showing how much the SER has been reduced. And so it reduces it by upwards of 4 points with some higher rates. And so there is a huge opportunity on solonetzik, hardpan, those type of soils to change the overall structure and salinity of the soil to be able to pass, criteria for salts. And that bottom picture is the same thing, but with a product we're developing to control the pH a little better. So with being a 3.5 to 4.5 pH, you can actually get too acidic. And so we're adding some calcium products to it that can help with your pH, getting it where it needs to be, and then also adding some calcium to it as well. That's helpful of the soil and works with that selenium or sodium reduction. And that's kind of the same picture, but with that product. But you can see at the top of the picture, that's just subsoil, fresh from the ground, that hasn't had any treatment to it, and the stuff at the bottom is just increasing rates of Humalite. So it does have some exciting stuff that hopefully we have a product out by midsummer that is pH controlled and to be able to use on solonetzik soils, on hardpan, high salt type soils. So that kind of leads me to the products and what you can get from us and how you can use it. And so we have 3 products right now, both in 1-ton bags and in bulk. We have an egg product that's 5 millimeters to 2 millimeters in size. It's 3/16 on the upper size to 2 millimeter on the bottom. So it's a granular product. Flows really nice. It's hauled in a Super V, like in that picture at the bottom. Hoppers, goes through bins. I actually run it through a seed drill last fall when I seeded some fall rye, and it went really well. But typically it's done in spin spreader or a floater or something along that aspect. Our middle-sized product we have is a turf product. It's 1 to 2 millimeter. So it's a little bit finer granule, a little more consistent, not quite as flowable as the egg product, but still good for small scale. It's typically used in the like lawn and garden, turf, grass, golf course type applications. And then we have a powdered product. This powder product is nice in the aspect that it's finer, so it gets a quicker usage of the product. But on the other side of it, it doesn't flow as nice. So it's a bag of flour type thing. So it's used typically by companies that are extracting the humic acid out of it or the fulvic acid out of it and creating those liquid products that Danny was talking about. So there is different ways to get it. You can get it directly from the mine. Reach out to us. We can get your product and get you going. We do have a new product going out this year. We're working with GFL and Eberhard Ag they're blending it with Biosol and spreading it. And so this fine product is getting used with that because they have a way to spread it and get the power of their product, which is a compost elemental sulfur product, with humics. So it does have a lot of synergies and works well together with the compost and the elemental sulfur to make the improvements guys are looking for. So that's another way to get Humalite applied to your land. So kind of key takeaways, there is significant opportunities in Alberta to use Humalite from this mine of the best resource available of raw product. Very big opportunities to use it for water retention. A lot of it is pretty much to make your soils become more resilient. So you're not going to see the huge increases you're going to see by increasing your fertility package, or, the big changes you'd see with changing the rates you used of nitrogen type thing. But it's becoming more resilient, handling things that are thrown at you that we do see here, from droughts to too much rain to, being able to handle some changes in weather and just overall more resilient. You see the quicker bangs for your buck results on marginal land. Obviously, it requires higher rates, but we have seen some pretty exciting things happen, especially with the salinity side. Like I was talking about before, you're seeing a lot more and more salinity issues come to fruition that, this is a fix for. And then some low CEC land, kind of like what Danny was talking about with sandy soils, seeing some quicker things, and as well as high pH soils, because it's pretty much a chemistry problem at that point. It does deal with high pH, lowering your pH with a low pH product, but at the same time, by increasing the pH of that product that we're putting down, it actually releases a lot more of the humic acid, because that's actually how it's extracted, is through a pH change process. And just wanted to make the key takeaway from this whole thing that it's another tool in the kit. It's not the silver bullet to fix your crop. So it's kind of a best used in a multi-year plan, and it's part of a regenerative plan. So if you're kind of working towards becoming more resilient, cutting back inputs, stuff like that over time, this is a tool to really help that out, but it's not going to fix your land overnight. That's kind of all I had. Just want to talk about the products and some stuff we've seen.
Perfect.
Is there
So we
anything
have
else?
some questions rolling in. So first question is, applied 150 pound per acre last year on trial acres. Is it something you should do annually?
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of goes back to the whole building organic matter, feeding that kind of microbial community, and building soil structure. It's a lot of these things aren't going to happen overnight, and so especially with our cycle of seasons we see up here, it is probably highly recommended to do a multi-season program with reasonable rates rather than trying to throw it all to it up front.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just add to what Clay is saying, is whoever had asked that question, and I'd have like 5 to 10 questions for you, right? So it's like, what soil are you dealing with? What challenge are you trying to solve for? If it's a low pH, or sorry, high pH, or a sandy soil, or something that it's going to take several years, or probably even to Clay's point, like other regenerative practices to really turn that soil around. That's where Humalite, can start to become part of a regular program. But I would just say that, like, I would want to know more information, but yeah.
Perfect. So we have another question. How heavy should it be put on at? Is it good for multiple years, or do you have to apply every year?
I'll touch on that a little bit. A lot of our research we've done at this point with Humalite has been on rates everywhere from 100 to 800 pounds an acre. That said, most economical type approaches is that 150 to 250 pounds, typically on the lower end of that, but it is a multi-year thing. You need to keep putting it in until you get to where you're happy with it. That said, it does unless you're have some serious kind of salinity problems or something like that, then you'd want to go to a lot higher rates. But it's the feed to this microbial community that you can't just stop it. Really, it's a rate. You probably want to use a significant more rate at the start, and then you can taper it off as your program goes along. But it needs to be a part of the plan.
Perfect. So we have another question. What kind of rate in pound per acre are you talking on problems? Sandy, salty soils.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because both of those are subjective, I guess. So it depends how sandy, how salty. like that picture I was showing on there of, heart of the rock, straight salt type subsoil that wasn't even topsoil. It gets to rates that are tons per acre to get it completely to that black dirt looking stuff. That said, if it's something that's farmable, you'd probably have a heavier program, like, so maybe you go to that 300 to 400 pounds for, a significant amount of years, because you're going to slowly see that land turn over. And a lot of it, you'll see even in the color of it, like, and that's what I've really noticed too on some of my land. And, a line I like to use pretty often is, everyone knows that black dirt is good quality dirt, and what makes black dirt black is humus.
Another question. Found it was a real run around to purchase your product. Have you streamlined your network? Has had best luck with your direct purchase?
Yeah, for sure. And so that's definitely something I'd love to touch on. So when we first started this, like I said, we were a thermal coal mine. We went from that to starting to screen this and sell this. So it was a learning curve for us. But then in the last couple of years, we had some exclusivity set on distributorship. But starting in 2024, especially in the Alberta territory, we are selling direct to customer again, and we have some salespeople to help you out and walk you through the process. But yeah, we are making that process a lot easier for the local market this year.
Perfect. So we have the last question for the day. What is the difference between top crop and West Meg? When I
So
talked with top crop, I was told I would pick it up at the mines at Sheerness.
yeah, that's 100% accurate. They're one of our distributors. They're a dealer for us. That said, you can continue to buy it from them, and they'll definitely take care of you like before. But you can buy it directly from the mine as well. So both of those are options. There's a few other distributors out there, so we're trying to grow our presence within Western Canada and honestly through the whole globe. But they're a good distributor that if you have questions, they can walk you through it and give you some economic support. But if there's somebody you don't like to deal with, we'll definitely take care of you directly.
I got another question. How much per pound is the cost?
Well, that's a good question. So obviously the retail price FOB the mine here is $250 a metric ton. That said, if guys are doing some significant acres and some bigger tonnages, we can always talk about quantity deals.
Perfect. Think so. Looks like that's all for all the questions. Thank you so much, Danny and Clay, for this excellent presentation. And thank you so much for answering all the questions. It was truly a pleasure to have you both with us today. And to all the attendees, we appreciate your participation in today's webinar. We hope you found the presentation informative and enjoyable. This marks the end of our session. Thank you once again for joining us. If you have any further inquiries or feedback, feel free to reach out to us. Have a wonderful day, guys.
Yeah, I just
Thank you
want to
so
note
much.
real quick.
Yeah,
I just want to note real quick, if anybody has any questions or wants the data from any of that research, reach out to myself or anybody at WestMet directly. We'll get you those publications. We can get you this presentation. We can get you any information you need, or a lot of it is actually on our website at westmedegg.com.
perfect. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.